7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Humans are now hackable animals.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
You're watching Mental Health Revolution, and in this series of videos we are going to strengthen our brains, make them less hackable, more bullshit-proof, and more tyranny-proof, starting today by trying to better understand our inner drive to conform. We humans are a super social species. Living together, we can protect each other, share resources, and work together towards common goals. Strong social bonds are associated with better physical and mental health and longevity, which is why meaningful human connections are part of my daily wellness empowerment program. We are meant to live in tribes, and our brain knows this. When left in its default mode network, one of the things our brain does is to construct a self-image, a social image, evaluate that image, and try to improve it in the eyes of others. If someone gives us the cold shoulder or criticizes us, we suffer. For prisoners, solitary confinement is a form of psychological torture, and for good reason. We want to be accepted. We want to fit in. We want to belong. We want to conform. This constant drive to conform is beautiful and natural, but it can also come at too high a price if, in order to fit in, we lose ourselves, our values, and our dreams. In her book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, palliative care worker Bronnie Ware writes, "Of all of the regrets and lessons shared with me as I sat beside their beds, the regret of not having lived a life true to themselves was the most common one of all." We want to realize early on that while human connections are deeply important, so is living a life that is true to ourselves. If we humans have a horizontal axis, which is our connection to family, friends, and society at large, we also have a vertical axis, which is our spiritual alignment, our connection to the divine, to what is true, good, and beautiful, and our ability to embody this connection here on earth. In times of social disruption, it is this vertical axis which can restore balance and beauty. And if history has taught us anything, it is that the world always looks back with tender and grateful eyes on individuals who, despite the opposition of their contemporaries, have stood up for truth, freedom, and human dignity. Meditation, mindfulness, prayer, and contemplation are simple, concrete practices we can all adopt in our daily lives to cultivate this vertical axis, this spiritual power, this inner place of moral fortitude which Socrates spoke from when he said, "It will be better for me that multitudes of men should disagree with me, rather than that I, being one, should be out of harmony with myself." Spiritual power will always be stronger than political power, for while the former aims at controlling oneself rather than others, the latter aims at controlling others rather than oneself. While the former brings us back to who we really are, the latter keeps us running towards how we'd like others to behave. While the former fills us with love and clarity, the latter consumes us with greed and agitation. And while the former works within and is rewarded by the laws of the universe, which are fundamentally spiritual, the latter ignores these laws and ends up losing at the game of life. Political power only gives a false sense of confidence. The only true confidence is spiritual. Spiritual power begins with the understanding that life is not just about the survival of the body, but also about the flourishing of the soul. Once we realize this, we are motivated to seek a more reliable comfort than the comfort of conformity, namely, the comfort of thinking, speaking, and acting kindly. Our drive to conform is not only a social glue which facilitates social cohesiveness, it is also a mental leash which prevents our thoughts from straying too far from the group's beliefs. A series of psychological experiments known as the Ash conformity experiments have investigated how easily individuals give up their truth for the sake of social belonging. In these experiments, participants are shown 4 lines and asked which of the last 3 is of the same height as the first. Under normal circumstances, participants answer this question with an over 99% success rate. But in these experiments, participants have to give their answer after hearing 7 actors give the same wrong answer. Of course, the participant doesn't know that these other people are actors. And 37% of the time, the participants adopt the actors' answers. 37%. This is how easily we bend the truth in front of our own eyes in order to fit in, even if it is to fit in with a small group of strangers and for a short moment. Our subconscious mind inhibits us from entertaining independent ideas because it believes that having a different idea to the group will lead to being judged, ostracized, and dying. Our brains are hardwired for survival, and from an evolutionary perspective, it makes perfect sense to inhibit independent thinking. If I think differently from the group, I will be judged, left alone, and die. It may sound funny, said so bluntly, and we may recognize the slippery slope fallacy in this line of reasoning. Yet, there is some ancestral wisdom in it, and we want to treat it with respect. We want to thank our drive to conform for doing its best to help us survive, and we also want to recognize its limitations. Groupthink is the practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or individual responsibility. Every group has a baseline level of groupthink, which arises naturally from its members' innate drive to conform. Add in members' confirmation bias, our tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of our existing beliefs, and you get an echo chamber, an environment in which a person encounters only beliefs or opinions which agree with their own, so that their existing views are reinforced and alternative ideas are not considered. Groupthink comes naturally, but it can also be reinforced structurally when decisions are made to promote a particular narrative and silence dissenting voices. The promotion of such narrative is particularly effective when it invokes a sense of social responsibility. This is called social norm messaging. Propaganda pioneer Edward Bernays understood this well. Humans are fearful of solitude. They are more sensitive to the voice of the herd than to any other influence. It is our drive to conform which makes us perceive social norm messages in an overly favorable light, a fallacy known as the bandwagon appeal. Communication tools are inherently ethically neutral. It is the way they are used which determines their ethical value. Just as a knife can be used to prepare food or to kill, a communication strategy can be used for the best or for the worst. For a social norm message to be ethical, it must meet 5 criteria. First, the people who created it did so with the pure intention of helping others. Second, the message is based on truth, not falsehood. Third, acceptance of the message supports long-term well-being of society as a whole. Fourth, the people who created the message have no conflicts of interest. And fifth, the message is delivered in a democratic space, which actively encourages democratic debate. Unethical social norm messages fulfill the opposite of these criteria. During the Nuremberg trials, American psychologist Gustav Gilbert asked Hermann Göring, a leading Nazi politician, how his party had managed to get so many people to commit such heinous crimes. His reply: "This is easy. All you have to do is tell the people that they are under attack and denounce the pacifists for lacking patriotism and putting the country at risk." The Nazis' social norm message, which I will refer to as the Nazi formula, failed to meet any of the 5 ethical criteria: purity of intent, truthfulness, usefulness, absence of conflict of interest, and democratic debate. The difference between classical dictatorship and totalitarianism is that while dictators rise to power by force only, totalitarian leaders rise to power by force and indoctrination. In recent years, advances in data collection, data analysis, neuroscience, behavioral science, and most importantly, the corporate takeover of the mainstream media have sharpened the propagandist tools. But the Nazi formula still reigns supreme. You are all threatened by ... and if you resist my recommendations, you are asocial and put everyone else in danger. This is the most dangerous form of social norm messaging. We want to recognize this formula when we hear it, because a problem well understood is a problem half solved. Of course, not all calls for a collective response to danger are deceptive or malicious, but all such calls should be examined with the greatest care, since they are extraordinarily effective in manipulating the masses and have caused far too much suffering in both distant and recent history. Although we may not know the true intentions of the alarmists, we must devote a great deal of effort, time, and energy to investigate whether their past reflects high or low moral standards, whether their message is true, whether adopting their message would benefit the collective, whether adopting their message would serve their personal interest, and whether there is a democratic space to discuss better alternatives. Another way to look at the Nazi formula is as the Nazi exploit. In information technology, an exploit is a software designed to take advantage of a weakness in a computer system, typically for malicious purposes such as installing malware. I don't think this analogy is too far off, and I think the small group of people who see the rest of humanity as nothing more but hackable animals will agree with me. The Nazi exploit injects a command into society: you are all threatened by ... and if you resist my recommendations, you are asocial and put everyone else in danger. To become less hackable, the first thing we want to do is to see variations of this exploit for what they really are and not to carry out their command. According to Brett Johnson, the original internet godfather and once the most wanted cybercriminal in the United States, 90% of successful cyber attacks use known exploits. These are the kinds of attacks we know about but don't do anything about. Could it be the same with human psychology? I believe a little education about our own cognitive biases can go a long way against propaganda and cognitive warfare. You are more than a hackable animal. You are a beautiful, creative soul. You are a human being of immeasurable value, and you can contribute to the great awakening of humanity, the awakening of your own and others' spiritual qualities. Please surround yourself with people who make you feel safe, seen, and supported. Establish a strong self-care routine. If you don't know where to start, have a look at my daily wellness empowerment program. And take time to learn about your own cognitive biases. Studies show that the more we know about our cognitive biases, the more likely we are to overcome them. Conformity goes hand in hand with compliance. To fit in, we obey orders, and we are rewarded for that. As toddlers, obedience is rewarded with praise. As school children, obedience is rewarded with good grades. And as adults, obedience is rewarded with pay and social status. Obedience is a pro-social behavior, and since pro-social behaviors are moral, we may subconsciously assume that obedience must always be moral. However, obedience and morality are fundamentally different, just as our horizontal axis is fundamentally different from our vertical axis. Whereas obedience is doing what we are told regardless of what is right, morality is doing what is right regardless of what we are told. We cannot expect others to always agree with our actions, even when our actions are moral. In his book, The Psychology of Good and Evil, Erwin Staub writes, "To see other people exercise independent judgment, self-responsibility, and self-reliance disturbs the conformist belief in the value of obedience and thus threatens their sense of self. It is not the case, therefore, that the conformist obeys while permitting others the freedom to make their own choice. This is the crabs in the bucket mentality, in which the conformist will try to drag down the self-reliant individual in the holy name of social cohesion, even when that kind of social cohesion is dysfunctional and the individual's proposal is beneficial. Doing what is right, regardless of what we are told, is not easy to do, of course, but this is how we win medals for spiritual badassery. I'm using masculine language here because it's fun and necessary. There's been so much talk about toxic masculinity lately that we may have thrown the baby out with the bathwater, discarding sacred masculinity. Just as there is toxic femininity and sacred femininity, there is toxic masculinity and sacred masculinity. To me, a hero is someone who combines sensitivity and action, someone contemplative and courageous, someone who allows their sacred femininity to inform their sacred masculinity. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "The society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its battles fought by fools." It is important for each of us to tap into our sacred masculinity and find the inner strength we need to think more for ourselves and connect with our vertical axis. Not all battles are worth fighting, but some are, like the battles for human rights, freedom, and democracy, if they are fought non-violently, with intelligence, heart, and courage. I hope this video has made you less hackable than yesterday, brought you back to your vertical axis, and nourished the spiritual warrior in you. I cannot conclude with better words than those of Rosa Parks, the First Lady of Civil Rights, when she said, "You must never be fearful about what you are doing when it is right."